It is a real privilege and honor to introduce our Congressman Ron Estes.
It's great to be back. I always enjoy coming back here. Unfortunately, I don't get to come to enjoy lunch as often as I'd like because of the time I spend in D.C. So it's good to be back when I can. And we're typically we're in D.C. 3 weeks a month for votes, and then 1 week we're able to be back in the district or do site visits around the country or that. And so got to head back to D.C. On Monday and be back there for moving forward. I thought I'd say a few remarks and then maybe take some questions. Ideally, leave some time at the end for questions. But one question I've been asked multiple times today already, and I give the answer is no, Susan's not here. The most important question. She's in Topeka working, and for all of us, and it's good because I want to make sure my state rep is continuing to work. But also, you may know this already, but I just got a text from her this morning. It sounds like they're going to be in session tomorrow as well. They were supposed to try to wrap up today, but it sounds like that's bleeding over into tomorrow. Kind of the fight, I don't keep up enough with all the details of the ins and outs of where they're at, but it's a struggle right now with having an avenue that you can craft legislation to get either governor's approval or get an override of governor's veto and figure out the wording that you can get through the House and get through the Senate and struggle through that. So it keeps them busy on that. But again, you don't need to hear about me or from me from Topeka State House because some of you probably know more and closely tracking that than I am. I just wanted to touch base on two or three things and then go forth from there. First, just kind of talking about where we're at the last several months in D.C. Speaker Johnson, when he was elected, I have a lot of respect for Speaker Johnson. He's a very strong moral man, very strong Christian, very strong thought process. He's an attorney by background. I don't hold that against him. He's a good one, as opposed to so many of the others. But it's given him a basis that, as well as being the head of the Republican Study Committee, which is the largest caucus of conservative Republicans in the House. He's got that background of the issues and the policies and what approach he wants to take going forward. With that said, he was dealt a bad hand. I mean, just because Kevin McCarthy was kicked out didn't mean the problems went away. And I'll back up a little bit and just kind of reiterate the main problem that we have at the federal level is just how much money that gets spent every year. And so typically you think about federal government should fund its operations. The federal fiscal year starts October 1st and runs till September 30th. It's been since 1997 since the federal government, the House, the Senate, and the President signed a funding bill on time by September 30th to fund the 12 different discretionary bills within the federal level. And again, 27 years now that it's been since they've actually funded the government on time. Instead of kind of gotten into this bad habit of wait till the last minute thinking that one, either you don't want to make some tough choices because the people that wanted you to vote yes when you voted no or wanted you to vote no when you voted yes are going to get mad at you. Or in a lot of cases, and we're seeing it more and more now, is that people can figure out the gaming system of, well, if I put it off the last minute, then maybe I can force my pet project in there, that the one that nobody else wants, but demand that be included in order to vote for it. So we've had 27 years of that with not the 12 appropriations bills passed through that process. Typically then doing a continuing resolution, which basically means we spend money on the same programs at the same level as we did the prior year. and without any improvements, without any changes. And then you do that for a temporary basis. Typically, it had been up until the week before Christmas was the deadline that was set for the continuing resolution, which meant that leading into the Christmas and holiday season, that you end up with all sorts of hue and cry about, well, is the government going to shut down right at Christmas time, and all the dramatics that come up with that process. So again, you get into the situation where people push their pet projects through, and you pass a big bloated omnibus spending bill that funds those 12 different groupings of funding for the federal government. And so what Speaker Johnson said was, well, let's break this cycle. Let's try to figure out how do we change this dynamic. And of course, he's working with. I mean, we're the underdog through all of that. I mean, the Republicans control only 1/2 of 1/3 of the federal government, just by having a majority in the House versus the Democrat majority in the Senate, Democrat leadership in the White House. And so, what the Speaker said was, we're not going to pass a continuing resolution that expires at the end of Christmas. So let's put it past that deadline if you're not going to come to an agreement on things. And the House had passed 7 of the 12 appropriations bills, which wasn't enough, but it was it was a stake in the ground, and those were not processed at all on the Senate. And so he said, let's push it back till after the first of the year, and also let's split it. Instead of doing the 12 bills, the 12 bills that fund, one of them funds Department of Defense, one of them funds Health and Human Services, one of them funds, the VA and military construction. And so he said, let's split those. And so that there's not as much hue and cry about shutting the government down. And so that's the process that was followed this year. It still wasn't a great process through that because, again, I mean, Mike's the underdog in terms of being the negotiation. Sitting in that scenario, you're sitting there with what they call the four corners, which is the House Republican and Democrat leader, and the Senate Democrat and Republican leader, and representatives from the White House. So Mike's still punching against his weight, trying to help make that happen. So we finally got through in March and passed the 2 different appropriations bills. And for the most part, they weren't really much of an improvement in the process. I mean, there were some limits in spending, which Mike was able to accomplish. There were some maintaining some of the good policies, but there also were a lot of spending included in that. And instead of focusing on, okay, let's fix some of the obvious errors that are going on in the country, such as the border, which I'll talk more about later, and focusing on security for the United States border, or focusing on how do we bend the curve on our spending, didn't happen enough. And instead, there was a whole lot of slush funding out there for LGBTQ community centers and support for funding and upgrades on abortion clinics and other things that were in there that a lot of Republicans didn't like. And in fact, the majority of the Republicans in the House and in the Senate did not vote for the final bill that came out. At the end of the day, those 2 bills added up, that funds the operation of the government, added up to about $1.79 trillion, which is only about a little over 25% of the total federal spending, was what the argument has been last March. The rest of federal spending, I don't get to vote on. The rest of federal spending is for all of the automatic spending programs, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, all of those provisions I don't get to vote on every year when we go through that process. And recently, in the last year and a half, interest has become a huge part of the spending as we go out. So now over 70% of the spending I don't vote on every year. And just to give you a frame of reference, interest has gone up from a year and a half ago. It was about $280 billion in interest payments. Next year, it's projected to be $1 trillion in interest payments. So 4 times, based on the additional borrowing through COVID and through continuous spending through both the automatic spending programs and the discretionary spending programs, but also because of the interest rates being higher. So next year, we're looking at the top 4 things that we're spending money on are making payments for Social Security, paying interest, making Medicare payments, and defense. So defense is 4th in that list of things that we're spending, the amount of money we're spending at the federal level. And so we've always got to do something different about that. I mean, and just from a debt standpoint, I mean, you've all heard the numbers, $34.5 trillion is where we're at now. It's actually today over that. And it's kind of hard. It's hard to write an editorial to complain about where we are with the borrowing because it changes. I mean, we had an editorial that we published that was published the first week of January. We'd written and submitted it to the newspaper at Christmas time, right before Christmas, and then the first week of January, I mean, it was already $300 billion out of date because of that. And I'll throw some scary examples out there. Is that yesterday or day before yesterday, we went over borrowing $100,000 a second. So in the amount of time that it took me to say $100,000, the federal government's now $100,000 deeper in debt through that process. The average debt for every American citizen is over $100,000. It's about $110,000, which is more than the household income in Kansas. The average household income in Kansas is $69,000. So what you make in a whole year is borrowed in a second and is what every individual owes through that process. So obviously we've got to do things different. A couple of things that we're focusing on from that process. I'm on the budget committee this year in addition to being on Ways and Means. And we're really putting a concerted effort. We've got a good group of the Republican members of the budget committee, and actually a couple of the Democrats are on there as well that are very concerned with the debt and where we're at and what do we need to do. So we're focusing on how do we move the process forward? How do we change the budgeting process that was created back in the 1970s? That's supposed to be that we create a budget that sets the top line spending number that then the appropriations committee takes and breaks down into those 12 different branches of government. For most of the last 27 years, there hasn't been a budget passed. So the appropriators and the leadership just create the top line numbers that they go spend on, that they can come up with an agreement. So we've got to get back to a process that actually has some controls and some oversight in that. And Chairman of the Budget Committee's Jody Arrington from Texas, and the quote he likes to use was a quote that James Madison used in the founding of the country. He said that we don't want to have a big public debt because having debt is a curse. And so the theme that we talk about in the Budget Committee is how we're going to reverse the curse at the federal level. And that's where our focus is on there. There's also, I mentioned that there were a couple of Democrats on the committee that also want to focus on that as well. And actually, I'm a member of a group. There's a half a dozen of us, half a dozen Democrats and the same number of Republicans that are working on what we call the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum. And basically, we're trying to focus on how do we bend the curve on spending? How do we change the dynamics of how we operate at the federal level? And trying to figure out how do we walk through the minefields of Well, this approach is a political lightning rod for the Democrats versus Republicans, and how can we look through that? We're trying to get a fiscal commission through the process, sort of like the BRAC military base closing process, which actually looked at the total impact of where the bases were, and looked at what the total spending was and what do we really need from a defense alignment aspect. If we can do that through federal spending on both the discretionary programs as well as the automatic spending programs, that then it comes back to Congress. I mean, right now the political dynamics are such that it's so easy to demagogue. You heard a lot, and you're going to hear a lot more in election year talking about cutting Social Security benefits. I mean, that's going to be a tagline that gets talked about a lot. President Biden used it and made the accusation in his State of the Union the last 2 years. But the truth of the matter is, if something's not done to protect and preserve Social Security, in 9 years, the benefit checks are going to be cut 23%. So if you're making a $1,000 check a month now as a retiree, your check's going to be cut by over $230 in that process. And the reason being is, and Social Security was, in the 80s, it was the trust fund was running out of money. The trust fund, the law set up on Social Security is that the trust fund can only pay out what it brings in. So it's always relied on more workers than retirees, so that the more workers could pay in while they're working and have enough money to pay checks to the retirees through that process. And then because the U.S. economy was going good in the 50s and 60s and 70s when U.S. was the dominant economic country in the world, a lot of the benefits were expanded. We added things like end-stage renal disease and some other things which are beneficial for a lot of folks. But what that led to was the trust fund being depleted in the 80s. And so the Greenspan Commission that was created by President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill actually addressed that and looked at how do we extend the life of the trust fund, particularly knowing these baby boomers are going to be retiring, and that's going to be a big drain on the retirement checks coming out. And so what they did was they moved the retirement age from 65 to 67 for folks born, everybody that was under 50, that age would gradually move up. And we're about to finish that cycle now with people, I think people born in 1960 are going to have a full retirement age of 67. And also that changed the cap on income of what payroll taxes are going to be processed against. And what it did was it built up this trust fund while the baby boomers were working. And now that we're in the middle of the baby boomers retiring, that's starting to pull that trust fund down. So we've got to do something along those lines now to protect that and move that system forward for another 25, 50 years. Ideally, it'd be 75 years, but I think that's a long stretch to figure out how do we do that. So, but if we extended the life for 25 to 50 years, that's a good solution to help get past this immediate crisis. So those are the types of things that we need to accomplish to bend this dynamic, because right now it's not right for us to spend money to maintain the lifestyle of Americans today and put the grandkids and great-grandkids in debt and having to pay that back. And that's a piece that we've got to focus on. Yeah. Other thing I wanted to touch base on a little bit and just kind of talk through some of the processes about border security in the United States. Our laws were originally created years ago focusing around the expectation that we want to maintain legal immigration. I mean, the United States is the country that has the most legal immigration in the world. And we want to continue that. I mean, most of our ancestors immigrated here from somewhere. And so that's not a process we want to stop or limit. And in fact, I'm an advocate that we need to make legal immigration easier because there's some problems in that system, and we need to make illegal immigration harder. And that's the approach that we ought to take. Yeah. So our laws that were developed over the years were, if you did not cross into the country through a legal border entry point or through legal processing through Customs and Border Patrol, it was an illegal entry. Now, normally, for decades, that was primarily a few working-aged, mostly male, that were looking for work. Whether it was picking fruits and vegetables, or whether it was working in construction or landscaping or whatever else. And so the laws were built around trying to stop that, the folks that would enter in between the border checkpoints, but also addressing what do you do with somebody that you do catch. So there's a process for if you catch somebody who's illegally come into the country, the Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE, once that individual gets captured and arrested somewhere in the country, they'd be deported, and that would be the process. But there was also leeway in that our laws, so that if somebody was prosecuted or persecuted in their own country because of either political reasons or because of religious reasons or anything else, they could come to the United States and request asylum. Now, what most laws are, including the United States, is if you pass through a third country, then on your way to the United States, for example, you leave Ecuador and come through Mexico, and you don't request asylum in Mexico, the United States has the right to send you back and request asylum in Mexico. And the same thing with other parts of the law, is that there's a parole provision that if somebody, say they have a major medical issue, that the Homeland Security and the president can grant a temporary parole to allow somebody who doesn't have the legal right to remain in the United States, come here for medical treatment, or come here to visit a sick relative, or some other temporary measure. But it's supposed to be on a case-by-case basis, and it's supposed to be temporary. Well, instead, what we have going on now is President Trump enforced those laws. In terms of, he created the Remain in Mexico policy, which basically told everybody, if you're coming to request asylum, you remain in Mexico if you're crossing the southern border until your asylum case is prosecuted. Now, President Biden, because of the way the laws are written, has chosen that because it says the president can enforce them, President Biden is choosing not to enforce them. And so he's not enforcing that you go back to Mexico if you cross the southern border and wait till your asylum case is adjudicated. And what that's turned into is people that cross, the cartels know they're not being enforced at the president level. So the cartels control the Mexican side of the southern border. And they make anywhere from $4,000, the numbers I've heard are for anywhere from $4,000 to $75,000 to sneak somebody across the border. Now, the $4,000 is they just walk them to the river and you walk across, and you encounter the Customs and Border Patrol, and because the law is not being enforced, to return them to Mexico to be processed for asylum, then they're brought in. Customs Border Patrol have to stop guarding the border and process these individuals. And when you request asylum, you're granted a court date with the asylum court to actually have that case adjudicated. Right now, it's a 6-year waiting period to have a court date. So all of these individuals that come in today are being told, we'll report back to the court in 6 years. And most of the folks that the cartels are pushing through across the border, they're either in cahoots with gang members somewhere throughout the country or other element around the country. And so in a lot of cases, people are saying, well, I want to go see my Uncle Joe in Cleveland. And in reality, that's where the literally it's slave trade in order to pay off that $4,000 or more to cross the border, that they have to go work in sweatshops or be sex trafficking or other provisions. The threats are very real because most of the rest of their family are still back in the home country. And so the cartels make money off of sending people through just on the actual slave trade process itself. Biden administration is aiding and abetting that in going through that process with the asylum and moving them around into the country. In order to hide the fact of what they're doing, one of the things that they've done is created this, utilizing the CBP app, Customs and Border Patrol One app, which basically means that instead of counting the number of people that come across the border, they're saying, well, if you fill out the app before you come across the border, then it'll be treated as you have lawful passage to come in, and then they'll send you around the country to apply your asylum. So it fudges the numbers of what's being reported as being encountered and captured across the border. The parole process, which was supposed to be created again on a case-by-case basis and on a basis of need, now it's being abused to such an extent that the standard that they're following, the administration's following, is that everybody from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Haiti get automatic parole, no matter what. They don't even apply. If you're just from one of those four countries, you get automatic parole in order to mask the numbers of people that are coming into the country. So as near as the last numbers that I have through February of this year that Customs and Border Patrol is reporting is that there were 8.1 million people that have crossed the border illegally since President Biden came into office in January 2021. In addition to that 8.1 million, there are 1.9 million known gotaways. And a known gotaway is an individual that was chased by the Customs and Border Patrol, that crossed into the country but not caught, or they were seen on cameras, and again, they were not able to be caught, or they tracked footprints of people through some of the remote areas in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California. And so 1.9 million people that have crossed the border illegally that are known gotaways. And one of the questions you have to ask is, why would 1.9 people cross the border and sneak through instead of following this easy process of coming across the border, being granted a 6-year right to stay? And oh, by the way, those folks that get a court date 6 years from now, 90% of them don't show up for the court date. And of those people that are given a court date, only about 4% have any asylum justification. That's the historical number. Now, I don't know what the number is going to be 6 years from now when all this massive number of people that have crossed the border are being adjudicated. So we know of those 1.9 that got away. I mean, we know some of the ones that are encountered, they're on the terrorist watch list. There are Chinese nationalists that are coming across the border. There are folks from 181 different countries that have crossed the border illegally in the last 3 years. And part of the process that they follow, and this is what the cartels game the system at, is if they cross the border and for example, one of the gimmicks is having folks fly from Romania or India or China to Mexico on a tourist visa and going for a holiday in Mexico. And then the cartels sneak them across the border. Part of what they have to do is throw away their tourist visa and any evidence that they had a right to be in Mexico, because otherwise the immigration laws are you get sent back to Mexico because that's where you had a right to be and should be. And so the cartels are making billions of dollars through this process, and the range of fees that are collected, just $4,000 to come across the border and stop, $8,000 or $10,000 to be taken to Houston and dropped off. The Chinese nationalists or others, the drug runners and or suspected spies are paying the $70,000, $75,000 to come across the border and to get through safely through that. We're seeing it, obviously the news talking about fentanyl and the number of overdoses there. There's roughly 300 deaths a day from fentanyl overdose. And it's not just people taking fentanyl, it's fentanyl coming in contact with other things that people take. Either it's mixed together with other drugs or other things that food that people take, or just the residue that affects not just individuals but also affects EMT and police and fire through that process. So there's roughly 300 people a day that die. That's about equivalent to an airplane crashing and killing everybody every day. So if an airplane crashed every day, the president would do something about it. But because they hide this in the onesies and twosies in terms of tracking and reporting them, it's not risen to the level of being important enough. We're seeing now a shift in awareness around the country. I mean, it's I noticed it even in the 4th District. We're seeing the top 3 things that we're seeing now in polling that we do here are border security, are the debt, and inflation and rising prices. And we've seen that consistently for a year now, that they may move around a little bit seeing that. But we're also seeing that increase at the national level as well, that there's an awareness that on both the debt as well as border security. I mean, you're hearing a lot of these sanctuary cities, New York, Denver, Chicago, others talking about they can't take any more illegal aliens coming to their countries or coming to their cities because they can't fund and take care of those and address that. Unfortunately, it's falling on deaf ears. I mean, President Biden surrounded himself with handlers that actually want to promote these policies. And just recently, within the last month or so, you saw a court ruling that said illegal aliens in the country should be counted and included in the census calculations that are out there, which is pretty stupid. I mean, when you think about, we don't include diplomats in the list of census for the United States. We don't include people who come to the United States on holiday or vacation as in the census count. So it's all part of this. I mean, actually, it's a power play. I mean, literally is what that process is. So what we passed in the House, a bill called H.R. 2, which basically the things I talked about, great. But it was 10 months ago and the Senate hadn't taken it up because they don't want to take it up. They don't want to address anything about border security because it may weaken their political position. Basically what we were saying in H.R. 2 was that the president doesn't have the option to enforce the asylum provision. If somebody comes from a third country, you have to go back to the third party. And so instead of the president having the option to offer blanket parole, he can't offer blanket parole. He can only do the case by case and only do it on a temporary basis through that process. And that really was what we don't necessarily need more laws if we have a president and Homeland Security that's willing to enforce what we have. But H.R. 2 was designed to say the president has to enforce that, and it's not been taken up by the Senate. And this is one of those glaring examples where elections have consequences, and we see the result of that on both the Democrat in the Senate and the White House in terms of the provisions through that. So we, as we run into this November, I think when we look at the elections this November, we're going to see a contrast between the 2020 election and 2024 election. We're both President Trump and President Biden running and campaigning. In 2020, it was the campaign was about President Trump's record, all the policies he put in place, as well as the negatives. You want to talk about his communication style. You want to talk about his way of interacting with people in certain cases. Versus Joe Biden was always talking about positive things. He didn't have that record. Well, now you have 3.5-year record of Joe Biden as president compared to the term of President Trump, and you see what the impact of those policies are. And I think that's going to, again, I think as we talk about elections have consequences, I think that's going to be the impact of coming out is comparison of those two records that they have through that. So I touched base on a lot of different things. I could talk about a whole host of other things as we go through that. I did want to make sure that I allowed some time for questions on particular issues and what we go through there. I just think before I go into that, I want to talk a little bit about, America's a great country. And as much as we talk about, as much as some people talk about how bad America is and how much they want to change it, we for decades, multiple decades, have been a leader in the world, and it's because we stood up and continued to do good things, and that's why it was a great country and is a great country, and we need to continue to do that moving forward, and we need to continue that mindset of our government was set up to be slow and deliberative because we didn't want a lot of government. We wanted people to have the freedoms and opportunities to do the things they wanted to do. And we need to continue to face that. The world's still a dangerous place. And the world looks to America to be a leader through that. And we need to continue to focus on that for the policies we put forth. And because of that, we need to address our fiscal responsibilities, and we need to address our security responsibilities without convoluting border security with immigration. I mean, they're related, but they're different. And we need to improve our immigration process, but we particularly need to make sure we address our security for the country. I mean, that's defense and security of the borders of the country those are the key roles of the federal government. And why it was structured the way it was. So I'm going to pause there for some questions. I know this group likes to ask questions, so maybe allow a little extra time. Are you the question man?
Yeah, I'm the question man. I've been watching this all day long, and it says here at the Pachyderm Club. So here we go. Freedom requires active citizens. So with that, we're going to have some question time.
All right.
Okay. If you're a Pachyderm member and you have a question, raise your hand. I'll get to you.
Yes, Congressman, you're aware of the bridge that collapsed in Baltimore, and that's an infrastructure project. Now, Congress has already passed an infrastructure bill that the President signed. Why are Republicans going to push that this bridge expense be taken out of the Biden infrastructure bill?
So President Biden was wrong to stand up and say, the federal government will pay to replace this bridge. That's not the way infrastructure projects are done in the United States. I mean, we should handle that and treat it like we do every other transportation project and a match share between the federal government and the state and local governments. Now, there is a role for FEMA as any disaster in terms of helping with the cleanup and the cost there, and that predominantly is a federal role through that process. But actually replacing the bridge itself isn't a federal responsibility through that. Yep.
Congressman, thanks for being here. I'm Doug Estes. His wife is our state representative, and he's our federal representative. Can you tell us about the 4 Republicans that have resigned recently and what's happening and replacing them?
So every year, there are a lot of vacancies in the middle of the 2-year term. It's surprisingly more than you think. I mean, every cycle, since I've been in office, I'm in my fourth fourth term, there have been 4 to 6 or 7 people that leave. 1 or 2 that may pass away in the midst of that, or folks that get job opportunities or other things. And this year, I'll just talk about the people that have left since January. So, one was Kevin McCarthy, and what I think, and I haven't asked Kevin this personally, but what I think a piece of that was our ethics rules say that you can't become a lobbyist for a year after being in Congress. So I think this is me kind of making this story up. I think maybe that's his plan in the future. A year from January is going to be, I expect a new president to be in office and Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, that he'll probably be with a lobbying firm and his 1-year waiting period will be over with. Does that reduce our number of members? Yeah, it does, and makes it hard. Also in January, Congressman from Ohio, Bill Johnson, stepped down. The presidency of the University of Youngstown State University came open. It's in his district. He's had ties there for years. So it's kind of one of those things, you move to that. We also had a Democrat who really didn't make much news in the newspaper, but a guy by the name of Brian Higgins from New York, who stepped down, and he has some opportunities locally, and so that's what he's doing. And then the most recent one, and I don't understand all of the dynamics around this, was Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin, and Mike had announced he was not going to run for re-election, which I understand. He has 2 kids under 5 years old, and it's a tough life, particularly like that if you have your family at home. I mean, all members have to make the decision of, do you have your family in D.C. with you? And depends on where the kids' age are, depends on what your spouse's career is, and other things. So I understand why he was why he was not returning. But I don't know what I heard Wednesday that there was a job opportunity with a startup a company, a technology company, and I haven't heard that directly from him. So I'm a little surprised at that one about the timing and leaving early. But that obviously it makes it a little tougher for us to have. Right now, there's 218 Republicans and 213 Democrats in the House. So we could have one Republican that votes no on a particular issue, but we couldn't have 2 because it wouldn't pass through that. Yes.
Can you speak a little bit on the global stage, like the WHO and then Israel? So if you can share with us a little bit on the global stage.
So you tried to squeeze in 3 questions on this. So I've got them right here. I couldn't figure out how to get to them before I got the questions. So several things on the global stage. The world's a dangerous place. I mean, you look at and just talking about Israel, starting with that. I mean, it's very clear that if the President of the United States does not exude strength, that bad actors around the world are going to react to that and see what they can do. You see it from Iran, you see it from North Korea, you see it from China, you see it from Russia in the things that they do. And the fact that as soon as President Biden was elected, you saw Hamas out of Gaza sending fiery balloons into Israel and launching missiles, and it's a direct result of the lack of strength that the United States should be showing as a world leader, and then the horrific October 7th attack that Hamas snuck in through that, and Israel's fighting back. I mean, and what's sad to see is in our country we've had such a extended period where people don't dig into the facts, but they jump onto the oh, what's the politically popular theme that's being talked about now, and being talked about Hamas and protecting Palestinians. Well, Palestinian Authority left Gaza. They could not control Gaza because Hamas was there, and basically ceded it to Hamas control militarily. And when you look at the aspects of what Hamas had done there in Gaza, I mean, the interaction within the UNRWA relief agency, and building the tunnels under the hospitals and all the connection points there. I mean, literally Israel's fighting for its life through that process. And I know recently with I haven't heard an update in the last couple of days, and I haven't heard anything classified, so I don't know all the details about the Iranian Israel's being blamed for the embassy destruction in Lebanon on the Iranian embassy, and I haven't got all the details on that. But it goes to show, one, we need, as a country, we need to talk. We need to talk and act as reflective of what are our principles. I mean, we want people to have freedom and to have the opportunity to experience their life, not just in the United States, but around the world. I mean, that's the way we want the world to be, and we should continue to support that and to be engaged in that. Over the years, I think there's been a lot of effort put into how do we have organizations that lead the decisions and lead activity. Right now, there's a big concern with the WHO. I mean, we saw the failures of the WHO, the World Health Organization, during COVID, that because China had propped up the leader of the WHO during COVID, then WHO would never come out and blame China for any of COVID. And now the discussions around the United States and the world ceding their authority for health control with WHO, or their tax authority with the Organization of Economic Cooperation, OECD, are issues that, I mean, we should maintain our sovereignty and still continue to fight for that. And part of that, you've got to continue to be a strong leader and stand for the right goals that you want.
Sir, one young lady, she wants to apply for admission to medical school, but her application was not accepted because she doesn't have a green card. And she applied for green card many years ago. She didn't get it yet.
Yep.
Anything you can do to speed up the process of getting a green card?
So why don't you reach out to us in our office? One of the things that we do, and this, I'm glad that the staff were introduced here, because we do have part of our role in the district office is to focus on constituent support and services, whether it's issues dealing with visas and passports and travel documents with the State Department, or whether it's IRS or the VA or other issues. Yeah, contact us in the office. Yeah.
How many illegals have been apprehended in the state of Kansas?
I don't know the answer to that question, the number of illegals that have been apprehended, and that becomes a fuzzy number as well, because just because they've been apprehended, or you have a certain number of what's been apprehended, doesn't reflect what's totally here. And right now, too often, ICE, the Federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's supposed to be taking people that are in the country illegally and deporting them, is telling law enforcement, well, are they any immediate risk? And probably not, other than the fact that they're here illegally. I mean, they may not have broken a law, or maybe the law they broke was speeding or not having a driver's license. And so the federal law enforcement's not doing its job to take those folks from local sheriffs and law enforcement and actually adjudicating them the way they should through the process. So it gets hidden in all the numbers that get reported about how many people are being dealt with by immigration, by ICE, by Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Okay, questions are over now, and you can watch these videos on Wichita Pachyderm Club on the YouTube channel if you'd like to. Thank you, Ron, for coming out.
All right, good deal. Thank you all.